The future of Asia and the world takes center stage at the Boao Forum, and China is ready to drive global economic recovery. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. It's referred to as the Davos of Asia. The Boao Forum brings together world leaders to discuss regional and global development. China's top legislator made a keynote speech reaffirming the country's commitment to being open for business and to lead economic growth. CGTN's Gao Ang has more from Boao.
Asia in a world, common challenges, shared responsibilities. This is the theme for this year's Boao Forum for Asia. Zhao Leji, chairman of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, delivered a keynote speech at the opening plenary.
China will proactively dock with high-standard international economic and trade rules and build a market-oriented, law-based and international first-class investment environment. China will also continue to shorten the negative list for foreign investment access and remove all restrictions on foreign investment access in the manufacturing sector.
Zhao said that promoting high-quality development and Chinese modernization will inject strong impetus into recovery of the world economy and provide more opportunities for the development of other countries. He also stressed that China will continue to pursue green development and opening up, as well as strengthening global cooperation in scientific innovation.
China will adhere to the strategy of innovation-driven development, promote industrial innovation through scientific and technological innovation, and speed up the development of new quality productive forces.
China is opening, and this is very important as China's economy is growing rapidly, and this is long-term trend. I believe that China can bring to the world technologies, knowledge, investments, and this is very important for neighboring region, for the global world.
The Asian economy is growing. It's one of the fastest growing economies in the world, including China, India, and many other countries. And it is also very relevant that we address the challenges that are emanating out of growth, as well as existing challenges that are there in the world.
While some international institutions predicting that Asia will remain the engine of the global economy in 2024, this year's panel discussions focusing on Asia include topics such as deepening financial cooperation, promoting investment, and building the region as a growth center. Gao Ang, CGTN, Boao, Hainan Province.
There is a lot to talk about. Let's bring in our panel. From Boao, Carl Fei is a professor at BI Norwegian Business School and a visiting scholar at the Boao Forum. Also from Boao, Arvin Yeleri is an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. Wang Huiyao is founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, also joining us from Boao. And from Beijing, John Gong is a professor at the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome to all of you. Wang Huiyao, it's called the Boao Forum for Asia, but it covers issues and opportunities throughout the world. So give us a sense of the importance and significance of this forum.
Yes, actually, this is the 22nd or 23rd year actually of the Boao Forum, and it has actually fully recovered since pandemic, and so there's nearly 2,000 participants gathered here in Boao. But I think more important, and there's a wide ranging of topics, very current and very forward-looking, and of course, it's actually very stimulating as well. For example, I actually chaired the two sections. One is on the, how do we against the fragmentation of the trade, and we have the former Secretary of Commerce of U.S. Guterres, and we have a former China Chief Negotiator of Joint WTO Vice Minister of MOFCOM, and we have a former Vice Premier of Singapore, and of course we have economist Justin Ng. We don't talk about how we can avoid that. I mean, that's really an issue at this opening panel on that. And another panel I chaired is the, how the entrepreneur of Chinese going global, and also trying to stabilize the domestic economy and invest more and work more. So what I think this message is sending is that people are coming back, and policy has been reassured. On top of that, we just had the China Development Forum in Beijing. President Xi met a large group of U.S. CEOs and strategists. And of course, we follow on that, we have another Boao Forum. So you can see things are picking up. And we see all the journalists coming back. I give a talk to Bloomberg, and you see all those FT, CNBC. So I would think now Boao sent a strong signal, not only to Asia, but to the whole world, that China means business. China is really ready for the business, and China wants to have more business, and assure people the confidence that there is coming back, and there's no more to worry. Of course, there are some challenges still, but at least we see a host of policies like more visas for country free are opened, data can be flow, more relaxed now. And of course, foreigners are welcome, tourism are picking up. You see a host of things are improving, and Boao Forum just you discuss all those issues. And so I think it's really a good 3 or 4 days. Actually, it's quite a bit lengthy conference, and a lot of exchange, meet people. I met so many multinational CEOs, old friends, former politicians, and big gathering like this hasn't been really seen in the last several years during the pandemic. But now I'm glad that things are coming back.
Carl Fei, you were one of the speakers at the forum. The theme this year is Asia and the World, Common Challenges, Shared Responsibilities. Do you detect there's something of a shift in the global order, with Asian countries beginning to play a bigger and more significant role?
Yes, I do think that Asian countries, and in particular China, are trying to take a larger role as their economies grow. They're taking on some responsibility with that. I would also say that Boao Forum at this particular point in time is particularly important because we need to have different countries' leaders, different countries' companies meeting, as actually there are quite a few problems in the world right now. Some wars going on, some political tensions rising, more protectionism, some tariffs in different countries going up, figuring out things like, how to deal with AI. So there's a lot of things to think about. But for example, speaking of China, they've done things like, this event, trying to push for more free trade, trying to work on poverty alleviation, bringing 700 million people out of poverty here in China, trying to take some of those learnings and spread them around the world, pushing for tech collaboration. And probably the policy that has had the largest influence, sort of on the world of China is the Belt and Road Initiative, which has been quite successful in trying to link parts of the world together and trying to help develop some of the less developed countries, through things like creating a light rail network in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, having support for some ports in different African countries. And, some people criticize this, saying, oh, it's a, attempt to get assets from China. There have been some things that maybe were not as well thought out as they could be in terms of having countries take on too much debt and then having problems. Mm-hmm. Or, for the light rail in Addis Ababa, not really having enough financing for spare parts and so forth. This has now been solved. And I think my view is that it's a learning process. No one does everything perfectly the first time, and China step by step is learning quickly, as we've seen inside the country, the same thing external to the country. And so I think we really need to thank China for the work that they're doing and the increasingly important role they're playing globally.
Arvind, you were also a speaker at the forum. Good to have you with us. There was a report released at the forum which said that Asian economies are expected to grow by an average of 4.5% this year, with China expected to grow by 5%, driving global growth. Inflation we see in most Asian countries, it's easing. So what's the outlook for Asian economies?
Thank you, Anand, for having me on the program. Well, I mean, yes, Asia's rise has been quite critical for the global growth. If you look at the contribution of Asia Specifically talking about India and China's contribution to the global growth, it has been approximately, half of the global growth, approximately coming 30% from China and 16 to 17% from India. Both these economies are transitioning. Both these economies are at different stage of transitions. While India is transitioning to manufacturing oriented, it is trying to reduce its over dependency on services. What we see in China is a transition to the higher value added, technology-oriented, innovation-oriented economic approaches. So you would see that the orientation of both the economies are different than each other, as well as at the same time, when the transition happens, the upgrading of the economies happens. Both these economies are complementing to each other, adding to the colossal growth rates in Asia. That also means that the spillover effect and the other Asian countries, other Southeast Asian countries, are also padding into it. That gives a scenario that Asia emerges as one of the promising region, and that would be converting into a larger traction to the global economic growth, and that looks quite optimistic to me.
John Gong, we saw in our report at the beginning of the show that the chairman of the National People's Congress, the Standing Committee, he was talking there about China continuing to open up and attract foreign investment. Of course, this is not something new. China has been talking about this for a very long time. But where are we now? What is the status of that? How important is that for China?
Well, I think, the notion of continuing opening up, it's just not lip service. I mean, there is really substance behind it. For example, the Chinese government's commitment to totally opening up the manufacturing sectors, no strings attached, no conditions. There's one example. There are some other examples as well. I think, I think the most important thing is the commitment to create a business environment that's a level playing field, essentially, for foreign companies. And keep in mind that China did apply to the CPTPP, what's called the Comprehensive and Progressive TPP, Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, which has a very high bar in terms of the kind of market access a member country is supposed to provide. China is fully prepared to meet that standard. It is in the process of meeting that standard. So I think the notion of opening up has a lot of substance in it. China is continuing to move towards that direction. So I think the executives that went to Beijing to attend the China Development Forum also met with President Xi. They should be able to have a much better understanding of what President Xi is really talking about here.
John, just a moment ago, Wang Huiyao was telling us about that meeting that took place in Beijing, that conference there where the President Xi Jinping, addressed CEOs and other business leaders from the United States. At that meeting, the President Xi, he met with those business leaders. He emphasized mutually beneficial trade and economic ties. And he said that despite the fact that we know that these tariffs were put in place by Washington and efforts to cut off China's access to some technologies, I mean, they're still there, they're still in place. But when you listen to the president talk about mutually beneficial trade and economic ties, what is the message that China is sending? John?
I think he sends out a strong message that foreign companies, particularly American companies, are very much welcome here in the Chinese market, and the government will do everything possible to help these companies. And I think there's also another thing probably a lot of people didn't pay much attention to, and he said China is about to introduce a whole set of deep reform measures structural reform measures to improve the business environment, to align China's all aspects of society to move towards that direction. Continued opening up of a market-oriented economy, and I would suspect that there's something big coming out soon. So I pay very much attention to that statement from President Xi.
Wang Huiyao, the chairman of the national, at least the standing committee, the National People's Congress Standing Committee that I referred to earlier on, in that keynote speech that he made, he also referred or called on countries to transcend what he called the old mentality of bloc confrontation and zero-sum games, and he called on them to practice genuine multilateralism to build jointly an open world economy. But we know, for instance, that the relationship between China and the United States, these are the world's two biggest economies, it's riven right now by a lot of tensions. Can expanded trade and more economic links overcome these tensions?
Well, I think absolutely. It's really, let's get back to the basics. We have to follow the economic law. I mean, all the patterns and all the things proven that beneficial. I mean, since Second World War, our trade has gone up several hundred times, and people, billions of people lifted out of poverty, and we have benefited hugely on that, and we have prevented still prevented the Third World War happening yet. No, we were at the brink of that, but let's really work hard. So one of the messages we got here is actually, let's not do things non-productive. Have different silos and reinvent the wheels and try everything again. Every country busy on its own, and that's not good. I mean, we have to really take the competitive advantage, like David Ricardo proposed, a long time ago. So I think the people realize it doesn't make sense that we have all those restrictions, tariffs, sanctions. Also, we should not have the overemphasized security. I mean, we have so many things going on, like Five Eyes strengthening, NATO expanded, we have AUKUS, we have a Quad, we have Camp David, we have many things built up, even around China. But let's pursue economic globalization like China does. I mean, China has already launched the Belt and Road, and AIIB president was here. And also we have, joined the RCEP and wants to join CPTPP. And furthermore, China have an economic cooperation summit with Africa, Latin America, Central Asia, Gulf countries, all those places. Shows that we're using the economic globalization, really trying to dampen those security, overemphasize on that. So I think that's a totally different philosophy. And I think China is on the right path because, after all, we need to really show the people the economic and benefit, the livelihood improvement is the bottom line for the whole world. We cannot just artificially stop you selling this and buying that and trying to prevent each other, and as with all those Cold War mentality, and that's going nowhere. I mean, decouple or de-risk, those small yard, high fence, doesn't really sound really to reflect reality. And of course, there's a security issue, but we should not overemphasize that. And really, if we lose the prosperity, lose the development, that's the biggest risk. That's the biggest risk to the security. If we have a small pie and we have we're going to have a fight probably on that. Let's enlarge on the pie. So, as Munich Security Conference theme this year was avoid a lose-lose. We should really work on making the bigger pie rather than go back to the silos and everybody does its own, and then it's going to be very counterproductive.
Yeah. Carl Fei, one of the other topics that was discussed at the forum was reform of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. Of course, this was an organization that was formed after World War II in 1945. It was a very different time. The United States was one of the major powers in the world, and much of the architecture of those international financial organizations that were created at that time, the architect of many of those organizations was the United States. But the world has changed now. We see Asian countries, we see China. They've garnered a great deal of financial clout, a great deal of influence. We've seen their economies and how they've grown. They want a bigger say in organizations like the IMF. How do you see that kind of thing play out?
So yes, there was quite a bit of discussion about reform of various international agencies, in particular the IMF. For a company or an organization to remain relevant, it has to adapt, and the IMF is no different in that regard. So there are a number of things that would be good to adapt, but the real thing that China was particularly interested in, that was talked about here, was that there would be a benefit if one would have the quota proportional to the economic influence that a country has in the world. And at the moment, if you look at the percent of the quota, which essentially is nearly the same as the votes that the country will get and the guaranteed lending that they can get or borrowing that they can get, China has 6% of the quota, whereas the U.S. has 17% and Germany has 6% roughly. Right. And then if you look at the GDP, you can see that China has about. If you look at the GDP, you see China has 18%, the U.S. has 25%, and Germany has 4%. And so, if you would make the quota proportional to GDP, roughly speaking, it means that you should, at least double what China is having.
John Gong, the Chinese central bank governor, he's also talked about the possibility of establishing international financial mechanisms, instruments dedicated to Asia. I mean, one proposal is for countries to trade in their own currencies. We are seeing some of that. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, it's an intriguing idea, actually. I think it's not just a possibility, it's indeed happening. One example, and I think probably he's indeed talking about that, is the very important project, but probably not many people notice that, the project called the M-Bridge, proposed and actually implemented by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. What it really is using what I call the sovereign blockchain technology to enable what's called a multiple central bank digital currency platform. In other words, users can do payments overseas using local currency, and eventually it's going to be settled at the central bank level. It's an intriguing idea. It was supported by, of course, China. People's Bank of China, Central Bank here in China, as well as the Central Bank in UAE, United Arab Emirates, as well as Thailand. And I'm pretty sure there'll be more countries in Asia going to join. I think we are, the world is changing. It's moving away from a trade settlement perspective. It's moving away from a world that is, very much dominated by the U.S. dollar, to some extent the European Union's euro as well. I think the technologies are ripe right now for something like what the Hong Kong Monetary Authority is doing, that trade can indeed be settled with the local currencies, and the balance would be essentially settled among the central banks eventually with some currency, I guess. And on top of this, I know there's also a joint initiative happening at the within the BRIC organization, especially the BRICS new bank, the new World Bank, which is the BRICS sponsored bank. That is exploring the possibility of a synthetic currency for settlement of trade. So all these things are happening. So I think the overall objective is really towards a multi-currency world, as opposed to a world that's dominated by one single currency.
Yeah, Arvind, this is an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing right now. This sort of move towards lessening dependence on the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency in favor of using local currencies. I mean, we are seeing that in India, for instance. It pays for the oil that it imports from Russia in the rupee, or in some instances, it even uses the Chinese yuan. Where do you see this trend heading?
Well, I think this trend is, I think the word you use, the change. While the Asian economies are coming at the center stage, Asian economies are doing a lot of trade, trying to influence the global growth. It is quite natural to see that these economies are trying to trade using non-dollar currencies. And why so? Because you have taken the example of India. India's total imports maybe the exports also. About more than 86-87% of imports and exports are done using the dollar denominations, and I think that is not a good sign if we are trying to diversify the trade with the non-dollar economies. You're correctly saying about the renminbi. India's trade with China is being, growing year by year. It is somewhere about 125 to 130 billion US dollars, and then we're still talking about using the dollar. So those denominations are not really going to help the local currencies, because there is a growing trend of the economies to use the local currencies. For example, recently, the Reserve Bank of India has signed agreements with African countries, to open special postal rupee accounts. And China has been also signing the currency swap agreements.
Yes.
So this is all indicates actually these countries coming at the center stage, as far as the financial architecture and financial process are concerned globally.
Carl, I've just got a little bit of time left, just over a minute, but I want to talk about artificial intelligence. This, of course, is one of the major technologies that is being introduced in various sectors. We see that throughout the world. It is also posing major challenges for regulators, for governments. There must be, there's recognition that there needs to be some kind of regulation of this kind of technology. How big a challenge will it be to get some kind of global agreement on where artificial intelligence, the use of AI goes?
So there was a lot of discussion about AI regulation here, and I think there were sort of three things. One is, should we regulate it at all? Second is, if it's regulated, should it be at the local level or country level or regional or national or international? And third, how should you regulate? I think we've moved past should it be regulated at all and decided, yes, it should be regulated in some way. I think there's a growing consensus that regional or global regulation would be ideal. The challenge is it's so complicated. Will we ever get there? And so some countries are starting at the country level. There was a lot of talk about the EU AI Act, which a couple weeks ago was adopted,
right.
Which was sort of a classification of different levels of risk from unacceptable to high, medium, and low.
Right.
Unacceptable things that came out of there were things like using facial recognition through CCTV to make decisions without sort of human intervention.
Yeah.
Ironically, while this sort of thing was the attempt initially not to happen, in the end, it was allowed that police could actually use it, which is something some people have objected.
All right, Carl, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you there. We have run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.